Untrodden Peaks and Unfrequented Valleys. Section 17. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Untrodden Peaks and Unfrequented Valleys, A Midsummer Ramble Through the Dolomites, by Amelia B. Edwards. Chapter 7. Caprile, Part 2. Then, as before, a light mist begins to fall, and turns presently to a heavy rainstorm that becomes heavier the longer it lasts. Then, too, the path gets steep and stony, and the horses, which have for some time been showing signs of fatigue, slip and stumble at every step. As for the black, being frightened by a flash of very vivid lightning, he becomes suddenly restive, and all but carries the rider at a single bound into the gulf below. Hereupon we dismount, and letting the horses go down by the road, make our way in rain, wind, thunder, and lightning down a narrow zigzag path, at the bottom of which, some 300 feet below, appear the roofs and the church spire of Caprile. The Pezzis had given us up hours ago, but seeing our wretched little party coming along the village street, drenched, draggled, and miserable, rushed down in a body to meet and welcome us on the threshold. Old Signora Pezzi, gentle and cordial, young Signora Pezzi, still with a rose in her hair, the two sons whom we already know, and all the helps and hangers-on of the establishment. The men and horses arrive close upon our heels, but the carretta, left behind long since upon the road, never appears till some 2 hours later, having turned quite over on the edge of a precipice and deposited all our bags and rugs at the bottom of a steep and muddy gully, from which they were with difficulty recovered. Meanwhile a good fire is quickly lighted, wet clothing is taken to the kitchen to be dried, a hot supper is put in preparation, and all the discomforts of the journey are forgotten. Now the Pezzis is a large, old, rambling stone house, and consists, in fact, of 3 houses thrown into one. The floors are some of stone and some of wood. The rooms are at all sorts of levels. The windows are very small and full of flowers. An old metal sign, as old apparently as the days of the Falieri, swings at the corner outside, and a balcony of antique Italian wrought iron juts out over the doorway. The public room on the first floor is panelled with oak and contains a fine carved ceiling, while the landings, as usual, are engaged as places to dine in. A set of rooms, however, including the unwonted luxury of a comfortable private sitting-room, were assigned to us on the second floor, and these we retained during all the time that we made Caprile our headquarters. In the sitting-room we had a sofa, a round table, a chiffonnier, and even a bookcase containing Guicciardini's History of Italy and Teatro Francese in 30 volumes. Here also were Ball's guidebooks and Gilbert's Dolomite Mountains, presented to Signora Pezzi by the authors. On the walls, amid a variety of little framed prints and photographs, we found portraits of F.F.T. and his sisters; in the visitors' book the handwriting of J.A.S., of the N.'s, of the W.'s, and of other friends who had passed by in foregoing years. The place, in short, was warm with pleasant memories. No wonder that it seemed like home from the first, and was home while it lasted. At Caprile the traveller finds himself again in Italy. Coming down on foot in the pelting storm, we had crossed the frontier, it seemed, a little way above the zigzag. The village is but just over the border, and yet the houses and the people are as thoroughly Italian as if buried alive in the heart of the Apennines. It lies in a deep hollow at the foot of 4 mountains, and at the junction of 4 valleys. The 4 mountains are the Monte Frisolet, the Monte Mignon, the Monte Pezza, and the Monte Fernazza, known locally as the Monte Tos. The 4 valleys are the Val di Livina Lungo, the Val Fiorentino, the Val Pettorina, and the Val d'Alleghe, or Caudeval. Each of the first 3 of these valleys, to say nothing of a 4th and apparently nameless tributary coming down a rocky glen behind the village, brings its torrent to swell the flood of the Cordevole, which, a couple of miles lower down, flows southward through the lake of the Alleghe on its way to join the Piave in the Val di Mel. The village, murky and unprepossessing at first sight, consists of one straggling street partly built upon arches. The church, which is in no wise remarkable unless for the decorations of the organ loft, on which is profanely painted a medallion head of the Apollo Belvedere surrounded by bouquets of flutes, fiddles, and tambourines, is situated on a rising ground near the foot of the zigzag. At the farther end of the village, on the side of Alleghe, stands the column of St. Mark, commemorative of the time when Caprile, like Cadore, owned the sovereignty of the Doge and the Council of Ten. The Venetian lion on the top, a battered medieval bronze, was robbed some years ago of his wings, and the commune has talked of replacing them ever since. A carved shield on the front of the column is charged with the arms of Caprile, and beneath it a square stone tablet bears the following inscription: Scipione, Benzono, Pats, Vens, Seri, Senati, Veni, Comus, Super, Finibus, Beneficentis, Caprilensis, Ere, PVB, POS, Anno 1559. The little piazza in which this roadside monument stands is called the Contrada di San Marco. The torrent runs close behind it on one side, the international Dogana overlooks it on the other. In this open space the young men of the village play at palo all day long. To an onlooker this game, which in summer forms the absorbing occupation of half the middle-class youth of Italy, would seem to be governed by no laws whatever, but to consist simply in tossing the ball from player to player. They use no bats, they mark off no boundaries, they make no running. Their interest in it, however, and their excitement are unbounded. They begin immediately after breakfast and go on till dusk, and when they are not playing they are smoking cigarettes and looking on. The Italians and Austrians profess nowadays to be the best friends in the world, especially at these little frontier posts where they are brought into perpetual contact. But I observed that the young men of Caprile, although their favourite playing ground lay just under the windows of the Dogana, never invited the Austrian soldiers to take part in the game. These latter, standing about with their hands in their pockets, or sitting on the steps of the column, watched the players in a melancholy way, and looked as if they found life dull at Caprile. The first sight that one goes out of doors to see is, of course, the Civita. The first walk or drive one takes is to the lake of Alleghe. As they both lie in the same direction, and as the best view of the mountain is gained from the road leading to the lake, if not from the actual borders of the lake, most of the few travellers who come this way content themselves with dispatching both in a single morning, and then believe that they have done Caprile. The grand façade of the Civita, a sheer, magnificent wall of upright precipice, seamed from crown to foot with thousands of vertical fissures, and rising in a mighty arch towards the centre, faces the northwest, looking directly up the Cordevole towards Caprile, and filling in the end of the valley as a great organ front fills in the end of a cathedral aisle. Towards evening it takes all the glow of the sunset. In the morning, while the sun is yet low in the east, it shows through a veil of soft blue shade, vague and unreal as a dream. It was thus I first saw it. I had gone rambling out through the village before breakfast, and suddenly the Civita rose up before me like a beautiful ghost, draped in haze against a background of light. I thought it then, for simple breadth and height, for symmetry of outline, for unity of effect, the most ideal and majestic-looking mountain I had ever seen, and I think so still. The lake of Alleghe lies about 2 miles south-southeast of Caprile, in a green amphitheatre at the foot of the Civita, the Monte Pezza, and the Monteo Fernazza. The way to it lies along the left bank of the Cordevole, which here flows in a broad, strong current, and is bordered on the side of the char road by a barren, pebbly tract, sparsely overgrown with weeds and bushes. The river is dark and deep and brown. The lake, which is but an expansion of the river, is of a wonderful greenish blue, sapphire streaked with emerald. The river is always rushing on at a headlong, irresistible pace. The lake, except where the wind sweeps straight up the valley, is as placid as a sheet of looking-glass. The river, an aggregate of many tributaries, is as old, probably, as the mountains whence its many sources flow. The lake is new, a thing of yesterday. For 100 years are as yesterday in the world's history, and where the lake of Alleghe now mirrors the clouds and mountains, there were orchards and cornfields, farms and villages, only 102 years ago. A great bergfall from the Monte Pezza, or rather, 2 successive bergfalls, caused all this ruin and created all this beauty. These terrible catastrophes, as all travellers know, are common to mountain countries, but among these Dolomite valleys the bergfalls seem to have occurred, and seem to still occur, with greater frequency and on a more tremendous scale than elsewhere. You cannot walk or drive for 10 miles in any direction without coming upon some such scene of ruin. It may have happened last year, or 10 or 50 or 100 years ago, or it may have happened in prehistoric ages. Your guide in general knows nothing about it. You ask him when it happened. He shrugs his shoulders and says, "Chi lo sa?" But there at all events lie the piled rocks with their buried secrets, and often there is no outward difference to show which fell within the memory of man, and which before the date of man's creation. The history of the Lake of Alleghe has, however, been handed down with unusual accuracy. The date of the calamity and the extent of the damage done are registered in certain parish books and municipal records, and these again are supplemented by deeds and papers preserved by private families in the villages round about. Most of these families, and among them the Pezzis of Caprile, can tell of ancestors whose houses and lands were buried in the great fall of 1771. This is how it happened. The Monte Pezza, of which I shall have more to say hereafter, lies to the west of the lake, being the largest of the 4 mountains already mentioned as surrounding the hollow in which Caprile is built. Northwards it breaks away in abrupt precipices, culminating in a fine rocky summit some 8,000 feet above the level of the sea. But on the side nearest the lake it slopes down in a succession of rich woods, pastures, and picturesque ravines. Skirting the opposite shore one sees a vast, treacherous, smooth-looking slope of slaty rock, like a huge bald patch, extending all along the crest of the ridge on this side. It was from thence the fall came. It was this crest that slid away, slowly at first, and then with terrible swiftness down into the valley. The first disaster happened in the month of January, 1771. A charcoal burner, it is said, who had been at work up in the woods, came down towards close of day, white and breathless, calling on those in the plain to save themselves, for the mountain was moving. A swift runner with the fear of death behind him, he fled from village to village, raising the cry as he went. But no one believed him. There were 4 villages then where now there is the lake. Incredulous of danger, the people of those 4 villages went to bed that evening as usual, and in the dead of night the whole side of the mountain came down with a mighty rush, and overwhelmed the sleepers, not one of whom escaped. 2 of the villages were buried, 2 were drowned, for the water of the Cordevole, driven suddenly back, spread out as in the case of the Piave, and formed the lake as we now see it. The 2 buried hamlets lay close under the foot of the mountain at the southern end of the basin, where the great masses of debris now lie piled in huge confusion. Alleghe, the chief place of the district, was situated somewhere about the middle of the lake, and is wholly lost to sight. The 4th village stood on a slope at the north end, close against that point where the Cordevole now flows into the lake. 4 more months went by, and then, on the 21st of May, there came a second downfall. This time the waters of the lake were driven up the valley with great violence, and destroyed even more property than before. In the little village which is now called Alleghe, and has been so called ever since the first Alleghe was effaced, the whole east end and choir of the present church were swept away, and the organ was carried to a considerable distance up the glen. At the same moment, for the whole lake seems to have surged up suddenly as one wave, a tree was hurled in through the window of the room in which the curé was sitting at dinner, and the servant awaiting upon him was killed on the spot. The choir has been rebuilt since then, and the organ, repaired and replaced, does duty to this day. No monument or tablet, so far as I could learn, has ever been erected to the memory of those who perished in these two great disasters, but a catafalque is dressed, and candles are lighted, and a solemn commemorative mass for the souls of the lost and dead is performed in the church at Alleghe on the 21st of May in every year. Section 18.